Growing up in the projects, I didn't see a single healthy, stable relationship. When I started dating, intellectually, I knew what a toxic person looked like, but emotionally, it didn't matter. From the moment you're born into a broken environment, you're being conditioned, and that conditioning is powerful enough to make you chase the very things you know will destroy you. Now, I've never hit a woman, but the only time I came close was with a woman I dated and argued with so much that the noise from our fights actually got me kicked out of my apartment. This was the same woman who cheated on me and got pregnant by a dude at work, but the chaos she brought into my life felt so familiar that I kept interacting with her. Now, I wasn't so messed up that I took her seriously after that, but in many ways, that was even worse. If I had dated her exclusively and seriously, my pride and self respect would have been in the toilet, but at least I could have told myself I was stepping up and being a real man by playing stepdaddy. If I'd cut her off completely, my sanity would have been intact, but I would have drove myself crazy thinking about her, the nice things she did sometimes, and the sex. She was damn beautiful, a Brazilian who was built just right, and I was broke. She let me use her car, and when you don't have much going for you, that kind of comfort feels like control. My mom ended up moving her into the house and acted like the kid was her grandchild, even down to trying to get us all to take family photos. I didn't participate, but my mom got the photos done and hung them up around our house like it was a big happy family. Until the girl started bringing different dudes through and leaving her kid with my mom while still being disrespectful as all hell. One day, my mom finally had it and she kicked her out. I tell this story not just to show what happens when you ignore red flags, but to show how your childhood trains you to seek out chaos and find comfort in dysfunction. My hope is that by the end of this video, you'll be able to spot red flags, understand why you fell for them in the first place, and start repeating the same disasters. Or, at the very least, know when to hit the pause button and get some therapy before you try again. Now, what I didn't realize at the time was that nothing about that situation was random. It was programming. The same patterns I learned growing up were now running my relationships like software I didn't even know I'd installed. There's an old saying that goes, if you run into one asshole, they might be the problem. If you run into 10 assholes, then you might be the problem. The biggest red flag isn't out there, it's in here. It's the one you don't want to look at because it means you've got to admit you've been carrying something broken into every relationship you've ever been in. That red flag is your attachment style, and underneath that, your adverse childhood experiences score, or ACEs score. When I discuss this with people, I find that most people have at least heard of attachment styles and many are familiar, but most people don't know much about the adverse childhood experiences. So I'll dig into adverse childhood experiences right after I give a brief overview of attachment styles. I put them in that order because generally speaking, your attachment style is the symptom and your ACE score is the cause. Most people with an anxious or avoidant attachment style didn't just wake up that way one day. If you grew up in a house where love was unpredictable, sometimes warm, sometimes cold, your brain wired itself to chase closeness while preparing for rejection. That's the anxious attachment loop. If you learned early that vulnerability gets you hurt, you shut down, and now you pride yourself on not needing anyone, that's avoidant attachment. You don't become hyper clingy, distant, or emotionally unavailable by accident. Humans are social animals who not only seek to bond, but are more comfortable in relationships, romantic, platonic, familiar, or even business, are stable. So if you have an anxious or avoidant attachment style, you likely evolved that to survive. And what did you have to survive? Probably any number of adverse childhood experiences. Adverse childhood experiences are the kinds of event that no kid should have to go through, but many of us do anyway, and the effects of them extend well past childhood. Things like physical or emotional or sexual abuse, neglect, growing up around addiction, domestic violence, or even just living in a home where you never felt safe. Each one of these experiences leaves a mark, not just psychologically, but biologically. There are 10 experiences to be exact, and if you want to take the test to see where you score, I've left the link in the description. Even if you think you had the perfect childhood, I highly recommend you take it, especially if you keep dating narcissists or BPD chicks. You might be surprised how messed up you really are. This isn't a contest, but I scored 7 out of 10, and that explains everything to my alcoholism, to my relationships with women when I was younger. Research shows that a high ACE score changes how your brain handles stress, trust, attachment by rewiring your nervous system for survival instead of safety. When you grow up in chaos, whether it's abuse, neglect, addiction, or instability, Your brain's stress system, known as the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal or HPA axis, stays on a constant high alert, training your body to anticipate danger and adapt to instability rather than relax in safety. That constant flood of stress hormones like cortisol trains the amygdala, the part of your brain that detects danger, to stay hyperactive. And at the same time, it weakens the prefrontal cortex, which helps you regulate emotions and make rational decisions, and shrinks the hippocampus, which helps you separate real threats from memories of old ones. This chronic stress literally changes the structure and wiring of the brain, keeping your nervous system primed for a threat after the threat is gone. I talked about how this chronic stress changes the brain and keeps poor people poor in my video, Living in the Projects Taught Me the Real Reason Poor People Stay Poor. I've also linked to that in the description. These brain changes are why calm can feel unsafe to someone who's lived through instability. The same chemicals that make most people feel comfortable in connection, especially oxytocin, the bonding hormone, don't release properly in people with high ACE scores. There are other things that can downregulate oxytocin release that play a significant role, and one of the major red flags I'll cover later in this video, but I want to make it clear how big a deal early trauma is on your ability to form a relationship. Early trauma blunts oxytocin and increases cortisol, meaning closeness triggers anxiety instead of peace. So love doesn't register as calm, it registers as tension. You end up craving connection, but also fearing it, chasing the emotional highs and lows your body recognizes as normal. I've said before on Twitter and X, or whatever one you want to call it, that men aren't trash, women aren't trash, you're just a low-quality human and birds of a feather flock together. That's mostly just being cheeky for engagement. The truth is that for many people, that's not weakness or bad taste in partners. It's conditioning from a brain that learned early on that safety was never guaranteed. And this is where it starts to bleed into your relationship choices. Because when your nervous system is wired to equate tension with connection, you don't just relive your childhood, you start to recreate it. You start calling chaos chemistry. You confuse anxiety for attraction. And you overlook red flags because they feel familiar. It's not that you can't spot the danger, it's that part of you still believes that the danger is part of love. But here's where it gets tricky. Having adverse childhood experiences doesn't automatically mean you'll end up anxious or avoidant. Some people go through hell and still find secure love later in life, but only if they recognize that their definition of normal might be warped. The point is, your attachment style is the filter that decides what kind of love feels comfortable. And if your filter was built in chaos, peace feels weird. You'll call healthy people boring, and you'll mistake instability for passion. So before you start memorizing red flags in other people, learn to recognize the ones in yourself. Because once you understand how your own attachment style and childhood experiences shape your attraction, you'll stop chasing the same disasters over and over and over again and start recognizing what healthy actually looks like. Yes, people have to pick better, but a lot of picking better is recognizing how messed up you are and then committing to working on yourself. Now, if you're new here or just don't know, I'm in a nice, stable 13-year relationship and I'm growing a family. But I didn't meet my wife until I was 28, getting sober and working on cleaning up my life. But before that, I wasn't even a player so much as I was legitimately trying to fill a void. Of course, I didn't realize it then, but one day I started dating with real intention and no longer entertaining women just because they were pretty, easy to get in bed, or came with a familiar chaos. With all of the red pill dating content on the internet, it's easy for guys to think they know what red flags look like. I know that because I was one. I've made videos about my time as a voice in the red pill. I've linked to those videos in the description. And I was critical of some of their ideas because of the long-term implications of their advice. But to be fair, one thing the red pill space nails is the need for guys to screen women. With that said, the efficacy of the screening protocol is questionable at best and unrealistic at worst. And it creates a false positive that will lead to you being lonely, or false negatives that will ruin your life. For example, if you're not with enough women, you'll learn that tattoos don't really mean anything either way. A girl having a good relationship with her father is nice if you guys become a couple and want to visit on holidays, but it doesn't mean the guy was a great teacher or that she didn't have any other positive masculine influences somewhere else. And as much as guys want to believe that a woman's body count means something, they never stop to ask themselves, well, how will I even know what it is? Maybe you ask and get an honest answer, and business continues as usual. But most times, if she answers, and that's a big if, she lost you because she likes you and knows the implication of that question. Or it's the last question you get to ask her. And that's assuming you're brave enough to even ask anyway. A lot of the classic red flags are red herrings. Now that I'm 40 and able to look back at how some of the girls turned out who I dated, I can see now what were actually red flags and what were just things that didn't work for me. Before I get into the real red flags, I want to tell you the two main reasons, though, why guys get involved with a girl despite seeing some of the more obvious warnings. One of the earliest pieces of dating advice I got was from a good friend of mine, the first time I went to college before I drank and partied myself to expulsion. There was this girl who was desperately trying to sleep with him and he kept brushing her off. The girl wasn't bad looking either, but he kept turning her down. One day I asked him why he wouldn't do anything with her, and he said, "I'm not anything special. If she's trying this hard to give it up to me, then I wonder how many other dudes are in line." Now, we can argue another day if that's a self-esteem issue. But for the record, Jay did extremely well with girls. I actually talk about Jay in my book, Hard Lessons from the Hurt Business, Boxing, and the Art of Life. He gave me a ride home from Rochester, New York to Pittsburgh after I drop out of college when I was 19. There is a link to the book in all formats in the pinned comment and in the description, but I digress. I met Jay when I was 19, and I'm 40 now. In those 21 years, I've met one other guy who has been able to turn down an attractive woman because she was coming on way stronger than seemed reasonable. There's a hint from one of the red flags later. Or because he knew she wasn't discerning with the guys she'd gotten with. This is the first reason dudes keep moving forward with girls who have obvious red flags. Because they look at a lot of the behavior we'll get into in a second, I swear, is something that feeds their ego. A guy immediately thinks there's something special about him, and that's why she's bringing the heat. Now, some of this comes down to naivete. I also talk about this in my video on becoming street smart, link in the description. When you view the world through rose-colored glasses, all the red flags look normal. The only way to become street smart is to fall for some BS. If you haven't been hurt or watched people get hurt, you're not going to be able to recognize the signs of a dangerous person. That doesn't just apply to physical danger, but also to emotional and mental danger. Naivete aside, I don't blame dudes for seeing the typical red flag behavior as desirable, because the average girl or the average man rarely, if ever, gets a girl pursuing him, making the first move. When it happens, it feels like he's won the lottery. And any ladies watching this, I'm sure some of you have made bold moves on men. But what most of you consider a bold move is just putting yourself in a man's vicinity so he can make a move. When you combine that with the depressing stats like 24% of men between the ages of 22 and 34 haven't had sex in the past year, or 63% of men under 30 are single, it's not even so much that men lack discernment. It's just that, and I use this word in a completely non-judgmental way, exactly as it's meant to be used, desperation trumps any discretion they might have. Sex and feeling desired are incredibly powerful drives, especially in men. It's as powerful as thirst, and when you're thirsty, you'll drink anything to survive. The second reason guys end up pushing forward despite some very obvious red flags, that's where I'm getting to, but I have to lay the foundation, is because they're messed up themselves. They've experienced a lot of adverse childhood events. I've talked extensively on this channel about the effects of being raised in a broken home, and because of my personal experience, that's focused on being raised by a single mom, abuse, and drugs and alcohol. But if you live in a home with domestic violence, you also end up in a situation where you'll either be easy to manipulate, emotionally insecure, or you'll think certain behaviors, those red flags we're going to get to, are just normal. Now, both of these points apply to women as well as men, but I'm a man. I speak to the male experience, and based on the stats, most of my audience are men. With that said, I think both men and women will find a lot of value in this list of red flags, as it's not your typical one. Yeah, there might be something here you've heard before, but what I hope to do here is deliver it to you in such a way that a light bulb goes off and you stop getting seduced by darkness. Now that I've turned the mirror back around on you, let's get to what many of you were hoping for, red flags you can spot in other people. I touched on it earlier, but as a quick recap, and I know a lot of you are going to disagree, but since you made it this far, hear me out. Most of what you see on popular red flag lists by dating coaches is either flat out wrong, imprecise enough to be useless, or useful, I should say, are impossible to know for sure. You can't know a girl's body count. Even if someone had a rocky relationship with the parents, it doesn't mean the parents didn't do a great job raising them or that they had other influences. And I've got enough experiences to know that most tattoos mean nothing. The biggest and most obvious red flag is someone who has cheated before, especially if they cheated in a relationship with you. I'm also going to throw someone into this category who's leaving a serious relationship specifically so they can take things to the next level with you. While not technically cheating, if someone leaves a current serious relationship just so they can be with you without a guilt trip on their conscience, that's a red flag. The girl I mentioned earlier who got pregnant by the guy at work, and my mom moved in and acted like the kid was her grandchild, even though we knew it wasn't from a DNA test. I started messing with her when she was with another guy. And the worst part is that I knew it and I knew the guy. I'm not proud of myself for that, but it's how I learned some awful lessons that I'm now sharing with you. The reason why cheating or leaving a serious relationship is such a big red flag is because it's the clearest sign that they aren't going to be loyal or faithful to you. And for anyone who thinks, well, I'll just sleep with her on the side if she's in a relationship, it's one of the easiest ways to lose your life. I made a video about how being a side piece can turn out really badly based on the guy I served with, which I linked to in the description. The next major red flag is anyone claiming to be celibate. Celibacy is not the same thing as being a virgin. When someone says they're currently celibate, my first thought is, wow, how much banging were you doing that you had to take a break? This isn't about judging someone based on their level of sexual activity. That is a false red flag, if for no other reason than someone who is sleeping around and wants to be in a relationship with you isn't going to let you know that they have double-digit bodies. Even though I'm telling you that by itself, the whole body count thing is a false flag, that doesn't mean that most people don't think it means something. So they aren't going to let you know how they approach sex either way. Their actions will do the talking. So if a person feels the need to advertise their celibacy or how many dates they're going to make you wait for having sex to you, who is showing them romantic interest, then it means that they have had a lot of bad experiences, but haven't made the connection that the people they continue to pick are because of their attachment style. And it's nothing to do with how quickly or how often they got into bed. It also means and I don't like the phrase ran through because it sounds so vulgar, so I'll say burnt out. I mean this literally and figuratively, is it's as close to what happens after too many emotional investments. Casual sex has its own set of problems, but a way more destructive activity is intense relationship hopping, where you quickly and frequently form emotional and sexual attachments with people only to break them off every few months for whatever reason. When someone keeps jumping into intense relationships and breaking them off, they're not just wearing themselves out emotionally, they're burning out their brain's bonding and reward systems. Every time you get close to someone, especially through sex, your brain releases that oxytocin again and dopamine, chemicals that trigger trust, pleasure, and attachment. But when that cycle of bonding and separation repeats too often, the brain adapts. This is literally what addiction is. Oxytocin receptors become less sensitive and dopamine released during new connection drops. You stop getting the same emotional high from closeness, and the crash after a breakup hits even harder. Over time, that trains your nervous system to crave the excitement of novelty instead of stable and real intimacy. That's why I don't say people like that are ran through. They're burnt through. Their bonding circuitry is desensitized. They've built a tolerance to attachment itself, so healthy love just doesn't register as exciting. It feels flat. So, like an addict trying to recover from being hyperstimulated on drugs because of all the pain and problems has brought them, they quit. Because past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior, you can be pretty sure that whatever behaviors they had that made them quit will manifest in any relationship you have with them and make your life worse. Speaking of sobriety, let's get one of the more common ones out of the way. Do not enter into a romantic relationship with anyone who uses hard drugs. And when I say hard drugs, I mean anything you have to cook, cut, stretch, compress to use. Pill poppers count too. So if you're out there popping Xannies, Vikes, Oxys, Perks, or anything other than legitimate medication for legitimate medical conditions, that's a hard drug user in my book. Aside from those drugs having a high potential for addiction and all the behavior that comes with addiction, It will ruin your life. You're either going to wake up to all your stuff being sold. People will be visiting your house at all hours of the night. The person you're with will be leaving at all hours of the night. Or you're going to end up as collateral damage when they can't pay a drug debt. Or you get pulled over and they have something on them. I also put excessive drinkers and weed smokers under this category. Do not date addicts. As someone who spent their 20s in a constant alcoholic haze that was occasionally mixed in with weed and pills, I can tell you that I was a mess and no one should have been with me. I'm lucky I didn't get some poor girl killed when I decided to get behind the wheel and so drunk driving home that I couldn't remember where I parked my car. It's bad news. To bring it full circle, the effects of your childhood experiences and red flags, I want to tell you what my mother said to me I think it was months after she moved that woman in and her child, but before they had to fight and she had to kick her out. She had the gall to ask me if the reason I wasn't coming around anymore was because of that girl living there. Of course it was. That's how oblivious my mother was to the situation. But what could I expect from someone who messed me up so badly that I missed out on all the red flags in this woman and in myself, and I went and picked her. Now, ending up with the wrong woman because you missed the red flags could ruin your life. But there are two other big mistakes that men make that make it impossible for them to ever get ahead in life. Watch this video right here. If you want to learn the other two things that men have to stop doing, if they want to make sure they don't end up behind bars or behind in child support or behind in their bills. As always, the rest is up to you, and I'll see you in the next video.